Hello everyone, this is Pixie and I will be the one who will discuss about comparison of three constitutions in the Philippines. And now, here are the constitutions of the Republic of the Philippines. First one is the Malolos Constitution, otherwise called as First Republic. Second one is the Japanese Constitution. It is called the Second Republic. Next one is the 1935 Constitution or the Commonwealth Constitution, along with the 1973 Constitution, also known as the Marcos or Martial Law Constitution, together with the 1986 Constitution or the Freedom Constitution, and lastly, the 1987 Present Constitution. Among the six constitutions, only three effectively govern the country. These are the 1935 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Later on, you'll understand why only three effectively govern the country. For now, let's focus on the basic. And to fully understand the comparison of the three constitutions, let's start with the definition of what is a constitution. What is Philippine Constitution? A constitution is the foundation of the system of government of the Philippines. Constitution defined in its broad sense. The term constitution refers to the body of rules and principles in the accordance with which the powers of sovereignty is regularly exercised. And now that we already know the meaning of a constitution, let's move on to the main purpose of the constitution. What is the main purpose of constitution? The Constitution has two main functions. First, it creates a national government consisting of a legislative, an executive, and a judicial branch, with a system of check and balances among the three branches. Second, it divides power between the federal government and the states. And third, it protects various individual liberties of American citizens. Now, let's move on to the importance of the Constitution. Why is a constitution important to us? The Philippine Constitution is important because it protects our rights, it enables us to have justice and live a beautiful life. It helps us to know our limitation and the right things we should do in order for us to become a good citizen. And so, we will know how to protect ourselves from enemies. Pretty amazing, right? And before proceeding into other things, let's have a recap of what is a constitution. A constitution is a system for government, codified as a written document, which contains fundamental laws and principles. It usually contains fundamental political principles and establishes the structure, procedures, powers, and duties of a government. The Constitution of the Philippines is the supreme law of the Philippines. The Constitution currently in effect was enacted in 1987 during the administration of President Corazon C. Aquino and is popularly known as the 1987 Constitution. Philippine constitutional law experts recognize three other previous constitutions as having effectively governed the country: the 1985 Commonwealth Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, and the 1986 Freedom Constitution. Constitutions for the Philippines were also drafted and adopted during the short-lived governments of President Emilio Aguinaldo in 1898 and Jose P. Laurel in 1943. What a history, right? Now, let's talk about the nature and purpose of Constitution. Nature and purpose of a Constitution serve as a supreme or fundamental law, and it also establishes basic framework and underlying principles of government. Now, we have here the four purposes of the government. All governments have the purposes of establishing laws, providing order and security, protecting their people from external threats, and providing for the general welfare. First is they establish laws. While our governments enact laws, a democracy embraces the principle of the rule of law, which ensures that both the government and the people operate under the same set of laws, which both protect and limit them. By this principle, no person in the state is above the law. Second is to maintain order and security. A government is responsible for protecting its people from harm, though the goal is providing order and security can take different forms in a dictatorship, where the focus is more on maintaining the regime, and in a democracy, where the focus is in ensuring safety and citizens' rights. Next is to protect from external threats. governments are responsible for preventing attacks on their people from persons or groups outside its borders. Lastly, they provide the general welfare. Governments provide a variety of services to promote the general welfare of their people, though the nature and extent of this program varies greatly depending on the values of the society. And now, we are now down to the constitutional law. Body of law derived from countries within constitution. It lays down and guides the duties and powers of the government and in the duties and rights of its citizens and residents. Next is we will talk about kind of constitution. First is all about as to their origin and history. It is a conventional or enacted and also cumulative or evolved. Next is based on their form. It can be written and unwritten. And we're down to the last, which is the manner of amending them. It can be the rigid or inelastic and flexible or elastic one. Our Constitution distinguished from statute. Constitution is a legislation direct from the people. It also merely states the general framework of the law, and it also intended not merely to meet existing conditions but to govern the future, and for the last Constitution is that it is the supreme or fundamental law. And for the next slide, we will talk about a statute. It is a legislation from the people's representatives. It provides the details of the subject of which it treats. It is intended primarily to meet existing conditions only in statute conforms to Constitution. And now, we are down to the most important topic of this presentation. Let's talk about the Malolos Constitution, 1899. First Republic, the Malolos Constitution was the first republican constitution in Asia. It declared that sovereignty resided exclusively in the people, stated basic civil rights, separated the church and state, and called for the creation of Assembly of Representatives to act as legislative body. It also called for a presidential form of government with the president elected for a term of 4 years by a majority of the assembly. It was titled Constitución Política and was written in Spanish following the Declaration of Independence from Spain, proclaimed on January 20, 1899, and was enacted and ratified by the Malolos Congress, a congress held in Malolos, Bulacan. And now, let's move on to the 1935 Commonwealth Republic. The 1935 Constitution was written in 1934, approved and adopted by the Commonwealth of the Philippines, 1935 to 1946, and later used by the Third Republic of the Philippines, 1946 to 1972. It was written with an eye to meeting the approval of the United States government as well so as to ensure that the U.S. would live up to its promise to grant the Philippines independence and not to have a promise to hold onto its position on the grounds that it was too politically immature and hence unready for full, real independence. Let's proceed to the Japanese-sponsored Republic in 1943, the Second Philippine Republic. The 1943 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, composed of a preamble and 12 articles, creates a republican state with a powerful executive branch and subordinate legislative and judicial branches. The executive power is vested in the President, who is to be elected by the members of the National Assembly from among themselves. The President is the head of the government and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The powers of the President are to veto any bill of the Assembly, to promulgate regulations when the Assembly is not in session, and in times of war or national emergency, to declare martial law, to suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, and to appoint the members of the Council of the State and officials of the local government. A limited legislative power is exercised by an unicameral National Assembly, whose members, like the President, are not directly elected by the people. Rather, the Assembly is composed of representatives from each province elected in Kalibape conventions throughout the country with appointed governors and mayors as ex-official members. The judicial powers is exercised by the Supreme Court as justice, together with judges, and lower courts are to be appointed by the President. And right now, we are now in the martial law Constitution of year 1973 Constitution of the Philippines. The 1973 Constitution, promulgated after Marcos' declaration of martial law, was supposed to introduce a parliamentary-style government, legislative power was vested in a National Assembly whose members were elected for 6-year terms. The president was ideally supposed to be elected as a symbolic and purely ceremonial head of state from the members of National Assembly for a 6-year term and could be re-elected to unlimited number of terms. Next one is the 1986 Freedom Constitution, 1987 as the present Constitution of the Philippines, following the EDSA, People Power Revolution that removed President Ferdinand E. Marcos from office. The new president, Corazon C. Aquino, issued Proclamation No. 3 as a provisional constitution. It adopted certain provisions from the 1973 Constitution and granted the president broad power to reorganize the government and remove officials from office, and mandated that the president would appoint a commission to draft a new constitution. And now that we already discussed about the 6th Constitution, let's now find out what is the comparison of the 3 Constitution and why only the 3 of them effectively govern the country. The 1935, 1973, and the 1987 Constitutions maintained the presidential form. It also got its Congress, but 1987 added the party list, a small percentage in practice, about 10%, make the arithmetic. There is also maintained the provincial setup, but 1987 added the autonomous regions or autonomy, the 3 branches of the government states, but the judiciary was empowered, at least in the Constitution, and the court's power of judicial review even on martial law. The separation of church and state is maintained since 1898. A provision in 1987 was flesh, making the police civilian and the national, used to be local. Election is direct in these constitutions. There is no by-elections, but majority or plurality of votes gains elects a candidate. The 1987 Constitution has a non-executing provision on banning or prohibiting political dynasties, but there is no specific law and its implementing rules to flesh in reality this 1987 inchoate mandate. Now, as a term of office, re-election is not allowed for the 6-year term of the president and the vice president and limits on re-elections for other elective positions. From 1898 to 1935 to 1973 down to 1987, there are many similarities. The basic framework was retained. There are good books on this. One is that of the former Associate Justice. Back to the topic. The 1898 Constitution was walked by the Yankees. The 1935 Constitution was under the tutelage of the Norte Americanos. The 1973 Constitution was a product of Marcos-guided democracy, guided by martial law, and the 1987 Constitution was a product of Miss Corey's Constitutional Commission. You as a student, what do you think are the similarities and differences of the 3 Constitutions? Too complicated, right? And that would be the end of my presentation. Again, I am Pixie and I hope you gained some knowledge with me. Thank you for listening. Bye!